You probably know the Kennedy family has their roots in Ireland, where their surname was originally O'Kennedia. In fact, around 900 years ago, the O'Kennedia were kings of a small kingdom called Ormond. However, by the 1800s, they had become everyday folk. In 1849, during the height of the Great Potato Famine, a certain Pat Kennedy migrated to the U.S. alongside 1.5 million of his countrymen. Pat settled in Boston, and it was there that his son P.J. Kennedy was born. P.J. went on to become a successful businessman and was also the first person in the Kennedy family to become a politician, serving as both a Massachusetts state legislator and state senator. Around the same time, another child of Irish immigrants named John F. Fitzgerald also entered politics, eventually becoming the mayor of Boston. In 1914, his daughter Rose married PJ's son Joseph, and thus the two political families were united as one. It was with this generation that the family's fortunes really took off, which is why Joseph and Rose are considered to be the patriarch and matriarch of the Kennedy family. You see, Joseph was a very shrewd investor, and while most people lost big when the stock market crashed in 1929, Joseph made millions. In fact, he eventually became a billionaire in today's money and ended up becoming one of the 15 richest men in America. He was also good friends with President Franklin D. Roosevelt and was appointed by FDR as the first chairman of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, which was formed in order to prevent another stock market crash. Later, FDR appointed him as the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom, just before World War II. While Joseph rubbed shoulders with those in the world of finance and politics, Rose focused on raising their 9 children and on being involved with various charities, something for which she was recognized for in 1951 when she received a rare noble title from the Pope. Let me now go through each of the 9 Kennedy children and tell you a bit about each one. The eldest was named after his father and was thus known as Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr. When he was born, his maternal grandfather, who was then mayor of Boston, declared that little Joseph would one day become the president of the United States. Obviously, he was close with that prediction, but not quite spot on. You see, even though Joe Jr. was indeed groomed to go into politics, he ended up dying in World War II when his airplane's payload exploded early. Prior to the war, he had been dating model Athalia Ponsell, and they were perhaps even engaged. Which brings me to the Kennedy curse. Joe Jr. was the first among many Kennedys and people connected to the Kennedys to die an early tragic death. So take note that as we go, I'll be adding this symbol to each victim of the curse. Strangely, 30 years after Joe's death, his former fiancée fell victim to the curse as well, being murdered in front of her home in 1974. Next up is the most famous Kennedy of all, John F. Kennedy, known as JFK for short. The F stands for Fitzgerald, his mother's maiden surname. After his brother Joe died, his father's ambitions fell to him. He had also served during the war and, in fact, had become a bit of a hero because of an incident in the Pacific where he ended up saving his crew after their boat, the PT-109, was sunk by a Japanese destroyer. This helped boost his image at home, and he went on to become, first of all, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives in 1947, and then a senator in 1953, before eventually winning the presidential race in 1960. At that point, he became the first ever Catholic president. In fact, until Joe Biden, he was the only Catholic president. JFK was also just 43 years old when he became president, which makes him the second youngest president ever. Teddy Roosevelt was actually the youngest at 42. Several important things happened during his presidency, such as the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the March on Washington. But unfortunately for him, most people remember his presidency more for how it ended, with him being assassinated during a motorcade in Dallas, Texas, an event that has sparked many conspiracy theories, some of which still persist to this day. Now, while JFK is generally thought of as having been a good president, His wife Jackie is almost universally considered to have been one of the best first ladies. In addition to being a major style icon, she was responsible for a major restoration of the White House and for ensuring its preservation in the future. She too came from a wealthy family, her father having been a successful stockbroker. However, he had a sister known as Big Eddie, Jackie's aunt, who is remembered today not for her initial wealth, but for her eventual poverty. In 1923, she and her husband bought a mansion called Grey Gardens, and when they separated 8 years later, she got to keep it. But she had no income of her own, so over the decades it became derelict in an extreme way. In the 1950s, her daughter, known as Little Eddie, came to live with her, and in the 1970s, their rundown home and the women's eccentric ways were featured in a documentary called Grey Gardens, which to this day is considered to be one of the best documentaries ever made. But back to Jackie Kennedy. 5 years after her husband's death, she married a Greek billionaire named Aristotle Onassis, who at the time was one of the richest men in the world. It is for this reason that the former First Lady became known as Jackie O. JFK and Jackie O had two main children, Caroline and JFK Jr. However, they also had a stillborn baby named Arabella and an infant son named Patrick, who died after just 2 days. They are considered victims of the curse as well. Caroline once dated the brother of the current Queen Camilla of the UK. However, she eventually married a Jewish man named Edwin Schlossberg, with whom she had 3 children. Currently, Caroline serves as the U.S. ambassador to Australia, and previously she was the ambassador to Japan. As a boy, John Jr. was nicknamed John John. He was 3 days short of 3 years old when his father was assassinated, and he's the boy in this famous photo, saluting his father's casket at the funeral. As a man, John Jr. was known as quite the heartthrob. He dated many famous women, including Madonna, Brooke Shields, Cindy Crawford, and Sarah Jessica Parker. However, he eventually married Carolyn Bessette. But 3 years later, they both died in a plane crash, becoming 2 more victims of the Kennedy curse. Therefore, JFK currently has only 5 surviving descendants: 1 daughter, 2 granddaughters, 1 grandson, and 1 great-grandson. Currently, Jack is one to watch, as he is widely considered to eventually go into politics. Okay, let's now look at the first of JFK's 5 sisters, Rosemary. Rosemary's story is a sad one. As a teen and young adult, Rosemary suffered from seizures and violent outbursts. Worried that she would embarrass the family, her father secretly arranged for her to have a lobotomy in 1941, without telling his wife or other children. The lobotomy was a disaster and left her with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. At this point, she was institutionalized, and for the next 20 years, virtually no one knew what had happened to her, not even her siblings. However, when JFK's father had a stroke in 1961 that left him unable to speak or walk, the siblings finally came to know the truth. Her condition was made public the next year, but the fact that it had been caused by a botched lobotomy didn't become public until 1987. Here's a photo of her around that time with one of her nephews. Rosemary died in 2005 at the age of 86. Next up is Kathleen Kennedy, better known as Kick. She served with the Red Cross in England during World War II, which is where she met the nobleman and army major William Cavendish. He was the heir to the dukedom of Devonshire, and hence held the courtesy title Marquess of Hartington. The pair married in 1944, and hence at that point she obtained the title Marchioness. However, just 3 months after the wedding, William was shot and killed by a German sniper during the liberation of Belgium. And then, about 4 years after that, she herself died in a plane crash. Thus, we have 2 more victims of the Kennedy curse. Which brings us to Eunice Kennedy, probably the most well-known of the Kennedy sisters. She married Sergeant Shriver, who served under JFK as the very first director of the Peace Corps, and under LBJ as the U.S. ambassador to France. Then, in 1972, he was on the presidential ticket, as George McGovern's running mate. They, of course, lost that year to Richard Nixon. Eunice is best known for her charity work focused on helping those with intellectual disabilities, which was inspired in part by her sister Rosemary. She founded the Special Olympics, which is currently led by her son Timothy. Her other sons are Bobby, who became the mayor of Santa Monica, Mark, who served as a state legislator, and Anthony, who started the charity Best Buddies. However, her most well-known child is her daughter Maria, who is also known for her charity work, and who married the famous actor Arnold Schwarzenegger. In 2003, he was elected governor of California, and thus Maria became the First Lady of California. Together, the couple have 4 children, including Catherine, who is married to the actor Chris Pratt. The 6th child of Joseph and Rose Kennedy was Patricia, better known as Pat. She's yet another example of a Kennedy marrying a famous actor, although my younger viewers might not know him. Peter Lawford was a member of the 1940s Rat Pack, which also included Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., among others. The couple had 4 children, most of whom kept a fairly low profile. We now come to JFK's younger brother, Robert F. Kennedy, also known as Bobby. He too served as a U.S. Senator, and then during his brother's presidency, he was appointed as U.S. Attorney General, one of the top cabinet positions. In 1968, 5 years after his brother's assassination, he too decided to run for president. He might even have been victorious, but on the night he won the California primary, and just 1 month after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., he too was assassinated, this time by a Palestinian who shot Bobby Kennedy because of Kennedy's support for Israel. So yeah, if you thought the Palestine-Israel conflict only became a big thing last year, you'd be wrong. Now, although Kennedy died at the young age of 42, he and his wife Ethel produced 11 children. Ethel, I should mention, is currently the only living member of this generation of the Kennedy family. As of 2024, she's 96 years old. Throughout her long life, she's had to witness 9 people from her branch of the tree die from unexpected causes. First, there were her parents, who died in a plane crash in 1955. Then, of course, there was her husband's assassination in 1968. This was followed by her son David's overdose in 1984 and her son Michael's death in a skiing accident in 1997. There was also the suicide of her daughter-in-law Mary in 2012, and more recently the overdose of her granddaughter Saoirse and the drowning deaths of her granddaughter Maeve and great-grandson Gideon. But in addition to having the most victims of the Kennedy curse, this branch of the tree also produced the most politicians. Bobby and Ethel's eldest, Kathleen, served as the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, and their son Joseph P. Kennedy II, named after his grandfather, served as a congressman, as did Joe Kennedy III, although he now serves as the U.S. Special Envoy to Northern Ireland. Mary Carey didn't become a politician, but she married one, Andrew Cuomo, who, during their marriage, was the U.S. Secretary for Housing and Urban Development, and then, after their divorce, was the governor of New York. He's the brother of former CNN anchor Chris Cuomo. And then, of course, there's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's the Kennedy family member who's most in the news these days. That's because he's currently running for president as an independent against both Biden and Trump, even though most of the members of the Kennedy family are dedicated Democrats and are therefore supporting Biden. Previous to this, Bobby Jr. was mostly known for being a conspiracy theorist and for promoting unorthodox ideas, such as that vaccines cause autism, that HIV does not cause AIDS, that the COVID restrictions were worse than the Holocaust, and that 5G is dangerous to our brains. His running mate, Nicole Shanahan, who until recently was the wife of Google co-founder Sergey Brin. RFK Jr. has been married 3 times and has 6 children. His current wife is actress Cheryl Hines, best known for playing Larry David's wife on Curb Your Enthusiasm. Okay, 2 more branches of the tree left. Next is Jean Kennedy, who married Stephen Smith, who was a political strategist for both JFK and RFK. During the Clinton years, Jean served as the ambassador to Ireland and was involved in the peace process there. She and her husband had 4 children. Last up is Ted Kennedy. He's the only one of the 4 Kennedy sons who lived to old age. But he had several close calls. First, less than a year after the JFK assassination, he was in a plane crash that killed both the pilot and another passenger. Then, less than a year after the RFK assassination, he accidentally drove a car off a bridge and into the water. He managed to swim to shore safely, but his female passenger did not, which, because of the lack of clarity surrounding the event, has led to all sorts of speculation, and is very likely the reason why Ted never became president. At the time of both of these incidents, Ted Kennedy was a U.S. Senator, a position he held for almost 47 years. He was married twice, first to Joan Bennett, the mother of his 3 children, and second to Victoria Reggie, who currently serves as the U.S. ambassador to Austria. His eldest daughter, Cara, was yet another victim of the Kennedy curse. She died of a heart attack at age 51 while doing her daily workout. His second-born, Ted Kennedy Jr., narrowly escaped the curse. As a child, he was diagnosed with cancer and had to get his leg amputated. He survived, though, and today uses a prosthetic leg, going on to serve as a state senator. Finally, there's Patrick J. Kennedy II, who is named after his great-grandfather. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 1995 at the age of 27, making him the first Gen Xer to serve in Congress. All right, so that was a look at all of the major official members of the Kennedy family. However, before I go, I want to mention a few people who were unofficially connected to the family. You see, many of the Kennedy men were known to have had extramarital affairs with some pretty high-profile women, the most famous of which was Marilyn Monroe, who is rumored to have been lovers with both President Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. JFK also had affairs with a Nazi spy, a woman connected to the mafia, several White House staff members, and this woman, who was mysteriously murdered 1 year after he was assassinated. As for Bobby, he mostly had affairs with famous singers and actresses, but it is rumored that he possibly also had one with Jackie O in the years following JFK's assassination. Where did they learn this behavior from? Well, probably from their father. He was known to be a philanderer as well, having had affairs with silent movie stars Gloria Swanson and Marlene Dietrich, who then later had an affair with President Kennedy. Okay, so that was a look at the